Yo.
Hello, Mr. Dratnos. So the task
Okay.
today is kind of big, but the idea is we are ranking all of the Dragonflight raid bosses against each other. Why I think it's interesting is in each raid, like we have done, I guess, tier lists of each raid, but time has passed. You've been able to think about them more. Time always helps. Just think about how down people were on BFA versus how like positive they are about it now in hindsight. And I think ranking them against each other will help relatively with bosses. We'll kind of go over how we're doing it. And then the really cool part after it is I kind of just want to do a little introspective about all of the last couple expansion raids in a macro sense and be like, generally, how does Dragonflight raids as a whole stack up to like Shadowland raids and BFA raids? And then I have my chat doing some busy work that I hope gets done, and that is getting the average pull count, or sorry, the total pull count for each raid in the last 3 expansions, and the average progression time of each raid for the last 3 expansions. And then we can look at each raid specifically, and then also each expansion's average raid progression time compared to the other expansions, and seeing, because I saw like JB tweeted something about that today too. It was something like, I don't like this raid. And then I like asked him to elaborate, and he was like, there's too many pulls and it's too hard, basically, is the thing. It's like the raids keep getting harder. I don't like it. I only like getting loot. I mean, his position is I only do raid for loot. So like obviously the opinion is always going to be raid easy, good, raid hard, bad, because I just want my gear from it. But that was interesting. So that made me think like, oh, like maybe we can actually do a little bit deeper look at that. But that is the task. Are you prepared for the task?
This is a large task, but yeah, I think that sounds like a lot of fun. I think we should try and probably not like spend too long rehashing things that were in all of our previous videos. So I think we probably want to focus on like the comparison between them and then things that might have changed about our perspectives given the benefit
Yeah.
of time.
No, you're right.
And
Yep.
yeah, not like recover what we've already done too much.
Completely agree. Okay, let's slam it. I'm probably just gonna keep this all on one page. So I think we talked about this before. Do you have a better idea than doing these sections of the raid together? So rather than doing Vault or Aberrus or wait, I was gonna say Sepulcher. That's crazy. Or Murdersil. What we would do is we would do kind of like all of the early bosses, kind of in a lump together. I don't know if we need to do all the first bosses, all the second bosses, whatever, but like, just all the stuff before your Skarns, before your, what was the mid-raid wall this raid? I guess like Smolderons, before your, like the point at the raid where it clearly changes the design philosophy and the difficulty. I think there's one of those in all these raids, like Dathia Kurog would be it for Vault. I think you'd stop before there and just do all those together, and then like kind of be able to talk about all the end boss at the same time as well. Obviously, we'd get to that later. Or is that something you want to do, or do you think there's a better way?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that the comparison at that level makes the most sense, and I think we also will want to compare to previous expansions in those same slots as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so let's just start it off, I guess, with Vault with Aranog. So there's like 3 first bosses, I guess, in this expansion. I think we've talked about this a lot before, where they're all kind of insignificant. Like they're at the point where like Blizzard has a formula for the first boss. It's just like okay, it's easy to pug. It's not super. The last like super cool one they Terrorger, right? The anima power boss. Like that was like probably the last really cool one, and then Shriekwing before that. But like other than that, they're just a thing. They like Aranog is here, but they're all kind of just Aranog, I don't know. Like Aranog, they're all just Aranog, which is like okay. So I don't know. How do you feel about the about Aranog specifically? I feel like it was pretty good.
Yeah, I think Aranog was pretty good here. Not anything especially inspired or anything like that, but I think as far as first bosses go, this is, about as good as it gets. Maybe a little bit of upwards room, but not much.
What do we have for like other early bosses in Vault? We have Taros, I guess would be. Well, no, I guess the Primal Council.
Primal Council was the one you'd go to second. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
it.
that one missed pretty bad.
Hate it.
I don't think it was that. Like, I don't think this goes in the very bottom most here, but I think it's just one above it. Yeah, there. See, I think it's appropriate for this because I mean it's another one of these things they've kept trying to do, which is make a fun kind of interesting council fight, but it ends up being just an overload of a bunch of mechanics, none of which actually matter. But there's just so many of them.
I feel like they've made Primal Council 3 times now. I feel like Prototype Pantheon, Primal Council, and well, those 2 really are like that. And then I feel like Council of this raid was a spiritual successor to that. Like Forgotten Experiments, they tried to kind of do something a little different, but they went back to it with Council. But I think Honestly, actually, just quick question of Prototype Pantheon, Primal Council, Forgotten Experiments, and Council of Dreams. Which one is your least favorite of those 4 council
Council
fights?
of Dreams, I think, is my least favorite right now. Prototype Pantheon is also really bad. I do think Primal Council is better than those 2. Probably because it's just like less annoying and it has less ability to wipe you.
Yeah, I kind of want to just talk about this now because, okay, what is the opposite of something growing on you?
Shrinking on you?
Okay, whatever it is, Council of Dreams is shrinking on me. I like saw this in testing, and I did this in testing, and I was like, oh, that's cool. You're a duck, you know. Oh, I guess you don't want every AoE council boss to die in 3 minutes, so you make them not be able to stack. Okay, kind of like a interesting boss design thing. Bro, every week I've done this, I hate this boss. You're a duck for like a lot of the fight. You're actually, okay, I think it wouldn't be as bad if you're turning into ducks, but the fact that there's so many green things that you are encouraged to constantly keep turning into a duck to like stay ahead of a reasonable amount of raid damage is ridiculous. The tank cleaves are lethal on all difficulties. Like the tank cleaves can just like go everywhere. I do think there is one plus. The way the ults work is kind of cool. I think that was probably the coolest way they've done the like bosses interacting with each other thing that they've done on all those fights too. But yeah, I would put. Are you cool, Council of Dreams and D? I hate this fight.
Yeah, to me that's like honestly like if there's an F, then Council of Dreams is that as well. It's like one of those rare bosses that's like really really bad.
Yeah, I'll do that. We'll call it Swamp.
Oh no, not the Swamp.
It is Swamp. Okay, Council of Dreams and Swamp. I completely agree with that. Okay, back to Vault. We did Primal Council. I put it in C. I feel like it's just a C tier. It's probably not D.
It definitely needs more than one tier separating it from Council of Dreams, so I think C is good.
Yep. Okay, cool. And then Taros. I love Taros.
Oh, yeah.
I think Taros is a banger. It's hard to call it an S tier fight just because when you're ranking a bunch of fights together, you're like, you know, like there's going to be like things like Fire Rack probably in S. Like, so it's like it's insane to assume you're comparing Taros to Fire Rack, but Taros was so good that we were like, man, if only Broodkeeper and Taros swapped positions and like Taros could have been what it was, but tuned like a second to last boss, kind of like a slightly different Rygalon, like how cool that could have been. And Taros is also exactly what you want at the beginning of a raid. It's like, it's the opposite of what, and this is probably a good time to talk about Volcaros too. It's the opposite of what Volcaros is, right? Like Volcaros is a failed Taros, and Taros is a perfect Volcaros. So I feel like Taros should get credit for that, and if anything, like give them reason to continue doing good single target early bosses.
Yeah, I think S here, it's not like perfect, right? Like there's, but I think we should hold S to a slightly lower standard than perfect. I think just like, you know, inspired, really, really good. That seems good to me. So I like S for this, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And then what about Volcaros?
I think D is probably appropriate. Like I don't think it falls to the level of Swamp because I don't actively hate doing it or anything like that, but I do think that it doesn't do anything good. It's not, you know, really creating a fun experience to fight it or kill it. Even guilds reaching it, you know, later, even later Mythic progression guilds like are finding it a step down in difficulty from Agira. And I don't know. I think unless you're somebody who's like got a pure JB take of bosses are good if and only if they are easy, I don't think anybody else is going to find Volcaros really rewarding.
And also the loot stinks. I think that helps too.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
That matters. But also Taros loot really, really stunk. And
that was the worst part about Taros, man, was that you literally were incentivized to never kill it, to not, you know, pollute your vault with it if you'd never killed it before, which
didn't they change the way the vault worked because of Taros?
Because of that.
Yeah. Like, if you guys knew how that worked in that raid, it basically your vault slots were like 2, 4, and 6. Actually, I think it was 2, 4, and 8. I think they ended up lowering it to 6 at some point. But like for your 2 box, you could kill these perfect 2 fights that had great gear and 2 unbelievably good, very rare trinkets. And if you ever killed Taros, you wouldn't be going to kill Senarth, so you wouldn't gain the next tier, and you would just be making your vault permanently polluted with gear you'd never ever want. It was so brutal. So like you, not only did you not even like, even if you wanted to continue in the raid, you just wouldn't because the loot was so bad, which is, I don't know if that's a knock on Taros. I think it's just a knock on loot system problems, which they have kind of fixed, but and very rare trinkets being way, way, way too good.
Yeah, I don't want to penalize Taros for that. I think that's like a meta systems problem and one that they solved, so I don't want to take points off for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Early bosses again in Vault. So in Vault, let's just go all the way up to like below the Kurog Dathia wall. So let's just say Senarth.
Senarth.
This is
Man,
not a
this
great fight.
It's an iconic fight. I've always wanted a poster of the boss.
Shut the
for this
fuck
thing.
up. Dude, they have them. They have them at the Team Liquid facility. Apparently they put them up in like 2 of the player apartments. Oh my god. And dude, okay, I didn't even know this, but apparently I thought there was only one Senarth map room, but apparently there's like 3, and they made a display of all 3. So like it's kind of like collecting Exodia's pieces of like there's only one person in the world with enough power to have all 3 Senarth room maps on displays. Okay.
That is wild. Yeah, I think this should do a little bit better than D personally. I thought that this fight was like one of those, experimental fights where I don't think it worked perfectly. I don't think it worked even particularly well, but I do think it wasn't like awful. And I think it's cool when they, try stuff. And I think that putting it in the 3rd or 4th boss of a raid is like, that's a good place to try stuff.
I actually agree with everything you said. Also, they did mention, and I don't know if this is just in the pathing through the raid to get to the bosses, but they did mention in the first raid of the next expansion that they were doing a lot more with verticality. And I wonder if that means that we will see more, not Senarth type bosses per se, being spiders and going up in webs and shit, but just going up more on bosses rather than like laterally. So I wonder if that could be interesting.
Yeah, I think interesting concept. Execution was not great. Like the slip and slide stuff was so weird as well, and was, I don't know, there was it just didn't work particularly well, but I do think this is like, an art project or whatever that they did, and it should get a little bit better.
No, I agree with you. I think the creativity is fun. It's like exactly why I think Laradar is like pretty good, because it's just very creative and pretty well executed, even though it was easy.
Fair, yeah.
Okay. That's all the early Vault stuff. So we're gonna hold off on like the mid-raid walls and onwards and do those at the same time. So anything we missed in Abris? Did we grab something in Abris here? No, we didn't actually. Kazara. Kazara is a first boss, right? And was good. I mean,
yeah.
Is the B tier just gonna be the like, this is what a first boss is in WoW now, and it's really not any more complicated than that? Was it better than Aeronaut? I don't know. I mean,
I think it was about the same as Aeronaut. I think it had some things better. Like, I think it was a more interesting mechanical fight, but it was a little bit less like fun zug blast fight, maybe, where Aeronaut was kind of good at that late in farm. So I don't know. I think it had its strengths, but I would save like A tier for Gnarlroot, TBH. I love Gnarlroot. I think that's a really good first boss.
I think Gnarlroot's better than both of them, yeah. But it's also, I don't know. First bosses, the difference between good and bad is, besides the like, Hellfire Assault type things, is like pretty, it's not a big gap. Okay, so Kazara, probably just leave it top of B. Chad is very much wanting to say A. We're gonna disagree with you guys though. Get owned. You guys are behind. You guys are typing and we're talking. All right. What is the second one? I've always loved Amalgam. I think Amalgamation Chamber is not as good as Taros, but I think one of the like cooler second bosses. But maybe I don't know. What do you think about it? Maybe I've always been too high on this boss. I think this boss fucking owns. But
yeah, I think it's sweet. I think this is like an ideal second boss in terms of, like, if you compare this to Primal Council, the number of mechanics going on is so much lower, but the importance of them is like high enough that they actually mean something, at least until you're, overgear it and you can stomp it, which I think, second bosses, you should always be able to do that eventually too. So, yeah, I think this is good. I think I would be happy to make a statement and put this into S even. I think this is, about as good as you can do in this slot in the raid.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'd put it in S just because I feel like, well, Taros and Amalgamation Chamber are trying to do 2 different things. So here's a big reason why I appreciate Amalgamation Chamber. It's a second boss. It's doing the Eye of the Jailer split the raid thing, but they did it 10 times better. It looks insane. I think just the whole aesthetic of Shadow Flame, that whole bit of like the purple red fire thing just looks cool as fuck. I think that matters. I think it's most of the fight is single target, but like the way you have to solve the first phase is very interesting. Like we went into progression with like 2 different ideas, and we ended up using one that some guild went in and did the raid like before we actually entered it, and I thought it was really cool and we used it. It's like I think there was like multiple cool ways to figure it out. The way you deal with the whole, like, it's also one of the best or the best implementation of everyone in the raid has a dot except half of them are different and you have to collide with someone of the other one to remove it. I think they've executed that perfectly. Doing it all on a second boss, you give it points for being creative as well. I don't know. I don't think I'd put it in S. I'd put it in A. Chat thinks it's pretty mid. They're kind of going B. See a few people saying lower. So maybe if you're someone who doesn't think about fights like we do, like you're not thinking about creativity and all that stuff, and you're just someone who shows up to raid and does bosses, it seems like they're thinking it's not as good as that. But I think points for creativity matter.
Yeah, I like A. I think A is fine for this.
Okay. What else we got in here? Oh, Zakali Assault. You were a
I'm a Zakali Assault apologist. Yeah, I think this is a fight that everybody thought was going to be awful and be unfun during testing, and it would have been if it was like later in the raid. But you know, they made it kind of easy. You sort of just show up each week and blast in there. I don't know. You bad. You can just zerg the boss down if you want instead as well, and like the gear check for that is not too high. So I don't know. This is the boss where it's like, you know, you're rolling up each week to a boss. This one, you don't have to set up a note or anything. You don't have to do any weird stuff. You just blast the boss. I had a lot of fun doing this.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot of people in chat saying low C, high D, trash clear boss, swamp. It was awful and well, okay. So I do appreciate a boss where it changes your strat a bit. Like you know, you started out by swapping each side and like doing some stuff. You can maybe move some boss killers from side to side that were pretty fast when he swapped. And then like people started doing the Zerg thing. I just feel like it's one of those things where it's like kind of too easy. They did the ad fight. Like you can't be mad because this boss, like, dude, imagine how much you would hate this fight if you were wiping on it for a while.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it would just, imagine if you had to like min-max throwing the rocks off the edge and like hitting the right mobs with them. Like, it would, there's really not a lot going on. I don't know. I'll let you rank it. You're an apologist. Where do you think it is?
I'm an apologist. I think probably still put it in like C or something, but I would maybe try, like, for me personally, my sentiment towards this is better than that, right? Like, if you told me like, hey, you're going in a raid and you got to clear, you know, this is one of those bosses I'm happy when we're walking up to, but I do think it's probably aggressive to put it higher than C.
It's aggressive to put it higher than C. I don't know if it's swamp though. Like guys, okay, for example, here you guys are saying swamp. Assault of Zakali and Council of Dreams are very, very similar boss positions. Are you telling me you would rather kill Council than Assault of Zakali? There's no fucking way. There's no way. Like, you
exactly
are lying,
right? Like,
if you're saying that.
Like the feeling of walking up to Zakali Assault was like, oh sweet, right? I'm gonna get some nice perps, right? I'm killing a boss. That's fun. The feeling of walking up to Council of Dreams is like, oh god, I have to do this every week. Can we do the skip? Does anybody actually need 9 years?
Anyone who's saying I'd rather do Council is a Moonkin that never goes on duck on purpose. That's it. It's the only person.
Yeah.
Or like some good cleaving ranged class. Like, ain't no way.
Or you're just like, yeah, I like the Pips trinket and I care about loot. That's also valid.
Bro,
I guess,
Assault is unassailably better than Council. It's not arguable. It's just a better fight. They're trying to do two different things, but one of them is awful and one of them is not as bad. I would say C just because of that for me.
Yeah, I'm down for C.
Yeah. Okay. And that is the last of the. No, it's not. Well, okay. Would you put Rashok and Forgotten Experiments? Would you put that tier of bosses before what we were talking about later? I think you would, right? Because like
I think at least Forgotten Experiments should go there. I think Rashok is a little bit more debatable. Rashok certainly would go there for you guys, but for a lot of guilds, it did like wall them. This would be an interesting one if you look at prog stats, because I bet I actually haven't looked at this recently, but I bet it's like 3 times more pulls than Experiments.
Oh, that's a great question, actually. Aberys, let's look. So let's just look from the bottom. You got like Kazara's like progression time of half an hour to 2 hours. Amalgamation Chamber, half an hour to an hour and a half. Forgotten Experiments, 2 to 6 hours. Assault of the Zakali, you know, instantly dead. And then Rashok instantly goes to, 6 to 14. So it's like double Forgotten Experiments, but it's also longer than Skarn.
Yeah.
Because, like, obviously the progression time for these bosses was, like, massive, and then it came down crazy. It was longer than Magmarax, which also makes sense. By the time you got there, you were super geared. And then Neltharion, obviously, a lot longer, and Sark a lot longer. Good difficulty curve here. I didn't realize that. Yeah, let's see. I think what we should do is discuss Forgotten Experiments now, and I think we should save Rashok to discuss with the tier right before the Smolderons, which would probably include Dathia, Kurog, and Rashok, I think.
Cool.
Yeah. I think that's a good difficulty level.
I think I like that as well, yeah.
Okay, so last one would be Forgotten Experiments then. So Forgotten Experiments, Again, I feel like it's just within the same line of boss thinking as the prototype Pantheon, as the other two council fights. It's just they were clearly designing a council fight, but they were like, how do we not make you AoE them and kill them in 3 minutes? Oh, well, they can't spawn until the next one's at 50%, kind of like Council Blood. But obviously, Council Blood is probably the closest thing to this, like in concept, but significantly worse than Council Blood, right? Of a fight. I don't know. I think you were also higher on Forgotten Experiments than me. I just think they executed this poorly, but
Yeah, I think it was not great. It was this weird, like, I will say also, so I as a tank, this was a weird fight where your tanks are just like actually bleeding to this dot that's like really nasty, which feels a little bit out of place in the spot in the raid compared to tank damage on like Scar
okay.
and even as well.
So you were in the middle of two different. I thought you were in the middle of two different arguments, which is like, you like it when they do creative tanks matter.
Yes,
things.
that part's cool.
Yeah, that part's cool, but it's just like, why is the tank damage here so much harder than the 3 bosses before and after this kind of thing?
Right. I do. So I will say, yeah, there is some creativity here of like run on top of the other tank to clear. That's a neat mechanic. So
yeah, because like it's like really hard to. It's 2023, right? About to be 2024 in a few days. Innovating tank mechanics in WoW is hard, and they've only done it really well. Like they've really broken against the grain. Actually, no, honestly, I feel like they do it more often than you'd think. You currently tank, so I'm sure you know. But like,
yeah, I mean, Tindral Fireack even has some stuff going on with it that's pretty new. So yeah, they keep coming up with stuff, but then they also, half the bosses are
they're just taunt swaps. But
yeah,
but I mean, like,
that's like just the bread and butter, right?
Yeah. So Forgotten Experiments, I don't know. Let me get a chat gauge here. Seeing B, seeing mid.
Yeah. I think I would be down for C on this. I wouldn't hate B either.
It's hard to. Yeah, I'm trying to think how far up it goes in C. Is Assault of the Zakali worse than Forgotten Experiment? Probably yes. Is it better than Senarth? Very different fights. It's better than Primal Council, right? Has to be. No?
I mean, yeah, they're trying to do different things. I think Primal Council I preferred to Forgotten Experiments a little bit, but I don't know. They're very similar to me.
All right, we'll just leave it here. We'll put it behind Senarth too. Fuck it. All right, there it goes. Yeah. All right, so Gnarlroot. You think Gnarlroot's awesome, right?
Yeah, I think this is like the ideal first boss. I mean, okay, there's like a couple of like sometimes you can get it's a little annoying the root phase or whatever. The fact that walking under the boss one shots you maybe is a little weird, but other than that, I don't know. This is just perfect, right? It's like you get to AoE some ads, you get a damage amp on the boss. It's not too hard, blast it.
Yep.
Fun first boss.
I agree. Yeah, I would say it's like there's probably been very few first bosses in history that are better than Gnarlroot, and we discussed this recently. I don't understand why Shriekwing is better. Like, Shriekwing is very commonly thought of as a much better first boss than Gnarlroot, and I don't understand why. Because both of them have the exact same, like, structure, except one of them, after their intermission, you get a damage amp, and you also get to AoE ads for free, which is fun. So it's like, I don't understand why Shriekwing.
I think Shriekwing had like a little bit more like difficulty to it, right? And like mechanical, the mechanics.
I think it's had better mechanics. Yeah, I think the mechanics were just better, and the intermission was also a lot cooler. I think. Yeah. Anyways, just random side note, but yeah, Gnarlroot's great. I can probably put it all the way up here. Yeah. Agira, I think Agira fucking sucks. I don't like. I have such a soft spot for creative bosses, for build bosses, I guess you could call them. Ones where your choices determine where you're getting mechanics, and in the best version of them, how you do certain mechanics impacts how the end of the fight goes, stuff like that, like Siegecraft or like Lei Shen, stuff like that. But they made one. So for one, all 3 of these phases don't matter. So choosing which one to go to doesn't feel like it does anything. And then also, they made one major change from PTR to live, which is why I rated this highly before it came out. They made, like, I think 3 times as many spears spawn. So this fight is just kill spears simulator. And that feels like shit. Because they're, like, super restrictive, and I don't know. I think this boss stinks real bad, but what do you think?
Yeah, basically, I agree. I think it's a good example of a fight where they realized they had to tone it down so that it could work as an early boss, because they didn't want these mechanics to be too intense and impactful for a second boss in a raid. But that led to the mechanics just kind of feeling out of place. And I think it is another case of like, you know, if they eased off on, say, the spear, or the amount of the fight that was about the spears, right, and they made that instead be more about actually like executing the overlaps correctly and having to do those right in some way, I think that could maybe have been better, but I think they may have just been screwed by where they put it in the raid.
Well, yeah, also this is going to sound really stupid, but it's like a tyrannical raid boss. Not in the sense of like its mechanics are one-shotting you and shit, like that would be commonly thought of, but in the tyrannical sense where in every tyrannical key you reach a point on most bosses where you're like, huh, I've been fighting this long enough. Oh wait, it still has 20% more health. That's Agira. Like Agira randomly, you're over fighting Agira very noticeably before it dies.
Yeah, and I think that's because it just does do the same. Like the important part of each phase is the spears, right? It's not the other stuff. So it is in a very similar way to a tyrannical boss, doing an easy mechanic that, you know, kills you if you stack too many people or whatever, sure, but like it's simple mechanic that you just keep repeating over and over again until the boss dies, and yeah, I think it outlives its welcome. Although, you know, at least you can blast it faster and faster each week, I guess.
I think it has to at least go in D because the feeling of walking up to Agira and the feeling of walking up to Council is very different.
Yeah, it's not Swamp.
It's not Swamp. It could be. I think it's D. I think it's D for sure. Is it D? Is it? I mean, if you're walking up to Volcaros, I feel like Agira is more annoying than Volcaros because at the very least, Volcaros is just you're just gonna go single target a boss for a couple minutes and it dies. You know, like Agira is just like annoying.
Yeah, I think both in D is probably
correct, but Agira is lower. I think Agira is lower.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. We already did Council. And we're gonna skip Naimu and Laerdar. So we are done with the early bosses. Okay, so now the early boss snapshot. A lot of mid, little bad, little. Is this perfectly symmetrical? It is. So, or no, I guess it has like an extra tier at the top.
It's making a nice like middle finger. Yeah.
Yeah, it's making a middle finger. Middle finger is I guess what would be perfectly average, right? They're doing things like they would average out to being that, maybe a little bit on the high side because you have a couple more on top, but. Let's talk about not the mid-tier wall, but like they've been doing this for a couple tiers now. It's actually something maybe is another interesting conversation. We've been using the same raid layout for a fucking long time. Has it been like since Sanctum, right? Really, Sanctum, like you could even argue is kind of like that, but like they've done the like early bosses into the two wings, into culminating into the mid-raid wall, into going onwards from that for, I mean, it's been so long now. I haven't done anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's been slight tweaks to it, but that core idea and the like two-wing nature, not splitting into three wings or whatever very often, has been something they've been doing. So I don't know why, but I don't mind it. I'm not too, I guess if you're gonna do like because I think the thing is as well, they've almost all been like 8 or 9 boss raids as well, right? So it's maybe that's just like the kind of structure that you do if you're doing that many.
Yeah. Okay. So the middle tier bosses are probably just Dathia, Kurog, Rashok, I think. So let's start off with an easy one. Let's talk about Rashok. This fight fucking owns insane, right?
Rashok, like Teros, the only problem with it is that I wanted more, and you know, it's early in the raid, right? But I think it's just another good example of like they have figured out pretty reliably how to do these bosses that are just mostly a single target fight, and then a few very intense mechanics, right?
Yeah. I mean, also this is, I think the only time ever, and I pay really close attention to this, is the only time ever that a Blizzard, not even Blizzard developer, the associate game director of Blizzard of Warcraft, he went on an interview and said that Rashok was so good that it should have taken the place of a worse boss later in the raid. I can't believe he said that, right? Like that never happens. I think that says enough about Rashok on its own. Yep, Rashok is insane. Rashok should be the blueprint for most single target bosses. Well, not the blueprint. They've done single target bosses right really well multiple times. It's something that has just happened with Rashok. But yeah, Rashok is among the list of one of the best bosses they've ever made for sure.
Yeah, I think S is firmly warranted here. I think it's, you know, this fight was it was a joy to prog and fight, even though it was early and not hard in the raid, which is very rare for me.
Mm-hmm. And then let's do Dathia. So I think Dathia, okay, so I'm always gonna like start with this because my job is thinking about it's a lot of things, but one of them is like thinking about bosses and how you'd solve them. And I think bosses that offer a more like interesting challenge intellectually to solve them, I will always think about higher. And then a lot that won't resonate with a lot of people because a lot of people don't do that. They look what we did, and just like what Dorki said in chat earlier, is a lot of people just do the boss, right? And like that's most of people, right? That's what most people are going to relate to. So like I loved figuring out Dathia. I thought the way you would handle it was really cool. I will say though, after PTR, especially after the heroic testing, how I thought they were going to do this, they made the fight a lot like more annoying. I also think it was bad visually. They did add energy markers like over those ads to see, like they had those little spheres. I don't know if you remember them. Like it was really hard to see, but like you could technically see how much energy each ad had by looking over their head, but it was really, really bad, really hard to see. And that I
did not know that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you think about raids often, right? And you didn't even know that there is an in-game visual for how much energy they have.
Yeah, had no idea.
But like, yeah, everyone needed like some like cracked out weak aura to see that, and even then they were all really janky. Anytime weak auras are really involved in raids, it's bad. You get knocked to the platform, you do some AoE. The tornadoes were like had a really weird targeting path. So this is exactly how it works. So half of them were purely random. They would go anywhere in the room, and half of them were targeted on you. So because of that, being a melee on this fight was like really, really fucking annoying, especially if you had a lot of melee. I want to hear what you think about this thing's position.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's an annoying encounter, right? Like, this is a fight where you're going to get gripped into the boss, you have to spread, and, like, you have these really frustrating moments where you walk over somebody or somebody walks over you, and it's, like, it's not really strategy that you screwed up, it's just a combination of bad play, but also, like, RNG that caused it to happen. So, I don't know, it was pretty frustrating, and then you'd also have to do this balancing the damage that you'd send up to each platform thing, but pretty frequently you were kind of just waiting for, you know, whoever was in charge of doing that to get the balance right, and, you know, get the right DPS cooldowns or whatever assigned to each platform, which obviously for you and I, who are like involved in that process, that's kind of interesting. But like Dorki was saying earlier, you know, 12 to 18 people in the raid are just like bored out of their minds, wiping to something that they can't control.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, doing a fight that it's not like they're developing a super strong mastery of an interesting mechanic. It's more just like kind of one out of every few pulls there's going to be an annoying, you know, BS RNG situation of tornadoes or marks or something that or like getting gripped into the middle of the boss, you know, because they had to use their movement ability or something like that, and then getting lobbed out to the edge of the room and killed and like that. I don't know. Plus you end this boss fight with, you just kind of are tunneling boss, and you don't really get this satisfying feeling of beating an enraged timer either, because it's kind of murky whether or not you're actually going to be able to beat the, you know, enrage while once you start ignoring the platforms too. And that it's kind of like you don't really get any good feedback about when you're supposed to make that decision or how much you're screwed by the extra stacks that the boss is getting. And I don't know, I think D is an appropriate place for
I think
boss
so.
to land.
I think so too, but I do want to point out that like before we were like Terrace is like, oh well, they should do more boss like this. I think that there is a version of Dathia that's awesome. Like I like that they experimented. We were talking about earlier about experimenting. Like,
yeah,
I really like that they experimented with Dathia, and I think you can make a boss like Dathia that's awesome. There was a lot of parts of this that made it bad, but it's not the core concept of like the energy system on those ads. I think it's really like that part of it was really smart. It just didn't live up to it. Also, this is definitely a when you killed it thing. Like when we killed this, it was really, really unfortunate because like we got really, really good at the fight, and then they nerfed the fuck out of it, and then it instantly died. Like those will always, I'll just never remember a boss like that positively. But at least like it was like a little tight. But like for most people, I think they skipped 1 or 2 extra platforms that we did, and then you just like you do 2 platforms and you just like burn the boss. And you mentioned something that's really interesting, which is maybe the worst way to wipe in this game, I think, is you are doing something, everything around you on your screen looks normal, and then from off of your screen, you notice a bunch of people die, or you wipe to something that you can't see. So, Dathia people on ad platforms. You're basically just, you know you wipe not by seeing it, but by hearing someone say, all right, we're dead. You know?
Yeah.
Or like Anduin, like people downstairs on Anduin or upstairs on Anduin, right? Like you'll be downstairs on Anduin, everything's fine. Oh, they missed a soul kick. Oh, that's weird. Flashbang. Everyone's dead. You know? Like, I don't know. That kind of stuff sucks.
Yeah, you hear somebody go over comms like we're dead, and then the raid leader's like, no, what? We're fine. Keep going. And then like 20 seconds later, everybody dies, and it's like, oh, okay, that's why we're dead.
Okay. So we're thinking D. We thinking low D. We thinking high D. Really hard to relatively compare Dathia to fucking Volcaros and Agira. I'm just gonna put it in the middle because I think it's impossible to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I agree with your take that like this is a D that is not. I'm not like mad that they tried this. I just think
exactly.
It
I think this is a
execution.
Yeah. I think you could argue Swamp. I'm gonna put it in D. Actually, man, I was about to say, remember how we made the argument for Agira and Volcaros, where you're like, when you're walking up to Agira and Volcaros, it's just simply not the feeling of walking up to Council. Dude, Dathia is a way worse feeling than both of these fights walking up, like way worse. And it had good gear too.
Yeah, Dathia was not a fun fight to farm. That is true.
Bro, I think it's Swamp. Like if you're gonna include the unspoken part of this conversation, someone who's not in this call, which is the person who just does the raid fight, bro, Dathia is awful. I think, like for those people. So like the only reason you'd put it in D is to encourage them to be more creative. But we've already talked about that. I think it's probably Swamp.
All right, I'm not gonna try and defend Dathia from that fate. That works for me.
Like here's the way I put it. Like, if we give our points and reasoning, we end up putting it in D, but then just simply 100 people in chat are spamming Swamp, that probably means that it's actually Swamp.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Like, if it's just a few, not to give them too much power, but, they feel pretty strongly about it. They're probably right. Okay, the Kurog. So we've had conversations about this before. I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, this is just such a shame because... so it's one of those fights with like a 30-page instruction manual dungeon journal, right? Which is fine because there's actually kind of an interesting promise created by this boss of swapping between these different areas and, manipulating what the boss is going to do. And like, yeah, that's really potentially intense, but and maybe not something for everybody to enjoy doing, but it's the kind of thing where like if you have to do that the first couple weeks and then later guilds that reach it don't have to do that, that could be pretty cool. But then they just add this thing into it where it spawns an ad upon walking into a new zone that just completely removes any promise of moving it between zones. There's this mechanic that's like supposed to be the thing that causes you to want to swap zones, which is just ramping damage anytime you're in any zone, but you can't, like, just mitigating that by healing through it is a much better idea than spawning another ad
that has 60 million health.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Like you're never gonna kill an extra one of those on progression situations.
And then also the right thing to do all the way through late cutting edge was to get to the first intermission.
Yeah.
You had to have tanks pull the boss into another zone in like a 0.3 to 0.5 second window, and that was like the only realistic way to do the fight in progression. And that never got changed. Like, how is that even, like, that should tell you everything, that if that is what you're doing. And you're talking about bad ways to wipe. Imagine you're just blasting, you're killing all these ads, you're like, all right, time for the intermission. Oh, let's all sit here and wait and see if these tanks can do this super niche weird movement thing and see if we automatically wipe or not. That's horrible. Like, that is so bad that existed. I'm not gonna wax poetic about this boss in a bad way, because I've done it before. I just want to say very quickly, I've elaborated on this in a previous video, so I'm not going to do the whole thing again. I think this boss is an absolute failure in boss design for what they were trying to do. I'll just leave it at that. I've given all of the reasons for why I feel that way when we actually ranked these bosses after progression. That said, for people who just do the raid, they are usually fond of this fight.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, right? Like, the failed version of this fight is still just kind of like a fun... numbers check, right? You just blast the boss, do some simple mechanics. If you're a tank and you have to do that 97 energy swap, it's annoying, but I don't know. I do think that the level of wasted potential is going to be very hard for me to overlook. It seems to me like they came up with like the core, the skeleton of a fight that would be really interesting, and then they couldn't figure out how to actually get over the finish line, and so they just neutered it instead and changed it into a much more generic fight. But the fact is that generic fight does do a fine job of being a generic fight. So I would say I still want to penalize it quite a bit. I would want to put this in like C, but I know chat is higher than that.
Yeah, they're saying A and B. Well, okay, so I'm going to put it higher than that because something we haven't talked about yet is it's one of the most fun fights to heal. And raid healing has been like super controversial this expansion. There's actually some stats recently put out where like the overhealing here is like historically high outside of like Antorus, which had Aura of Sacrifice, if you remember that. And like raid healing is really hard to come by. And like Magmarax was actually randomly one of the few fights this expansion where raid healing has felt good, and Kurog was one that felt like Kurog was like by far the most fun boss to heal in this raid, and I think that deserves credit. Like neither of us heal. You mentioned how annoying it is to tank this. Very few people, the relative percentage of people who have opinions on this, there's a very low percentage of them that are tanks, right? So, and I'm just gonna shout that out for the healers. I can't. So I would say this boss, if they did it right, if the boss design was, they were so close. No, they really weren't actually, but like. If they did boss design, this could have been one of the best bosses of all time. In fact, it probably should have been in Broodkeeper's place. I think it loses major points for absolutely and totally fucking that up. Like, irreversibly, so unbelievably bad they fucked this up. Just playing it might be an A. I think the way that you did this, and like also the fact that you never went into the lightning phase. The lightning phase is just 3 times harder than the rest of the phases. That's ridiculous. I would put it in C, but I think that the just everyday players saying they just liked doing Kurog, I think that has a lot of weight, so I'll put it up in B, probably above the first bosses. I don't. Yeah, it's fine. This isn't an A tier fight. Like, I don't know.
I'll take the B under protest, but yeah, that's fine.
What else? Do we have anything else in this tier? Oh, yeah, we have Laredar Naimu, and those are all before Smoldy. So yeah, Laredar. I guess Laredar Naimu. Those last ones.
Yeah.
We talked about these recently. I'm trying to look at like the rest of these. I feel like. Okay, Laredar, awesome concept. Completely, there's never been a fight like it. It's probably the best healer fight they've made. Healer fight, like you heal things as part of the fight, I think. I don't consider Fyrakk, for example, a healer fight, but like, you know, of all of those, like, council, or not council, like Sun King's Blessing, like, it's just the best one of those fights. You don't feel bad doing this every week. It's pretty fun. This is a decent reclear. I think it could have been maybe I think maybe a criticism of this raid is like if the difficulty curve made a little bit more sense, like maybe Laredar is like a little bit harder and you take some pulls off of, or you like do that initial 3-second seed nerf to Tindral like before progression and it's just 5 seconds the whole time. Like maybe that's just a better feel. I don't know. I like Laredar a lot. I give Laredar a ton of credit for design and creativity. I don't know how the everyday pull the boss man feels about this. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of creativity for sure. I do think that healer fights that revolve around like clicking a friendly unit and then healing it as well is something that a lot of healers I know really don't like it when they have to move off of their frames and have to look like other places for that information. So that is a complaint that I heard actually more about Fyrakk than this fight, but it is a complaint that I heard was that it was just kind of annoying to like do that process for the healers. I think though that, you know, it is a fight where much of the creativity gets ignored in practice because you just kind of blitz down the boss because it has this weird, like, I guess just the amount of health the boss has and the way that you're pushing it based off of a percent push rather than a timer, to me just feels off. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like, it's one of the bosses where you're walking up to each week and you're like, yeah, this is a fun boss, right? Like we're gonna do Laredar, like cool. Compare that feeling to feeling of walking up to like Council, right? Is night and day.
Yeah, I mean, no, Laredar is also there's one really bad part about Laredar. It's the mythic like private ore mechanic, the igniting growth. That feels horrible for everyone. Yeah, that is bad.
Dropping fire underneath you.
That is
why
a bad
is that
mechanic.
A private aura as well? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I don't know why that's a private aura, but even regardless of that, it's not the annoying kind of private aura where you're like macroing it and shit. But like,
yeah, it's just randomly.
It's just randomly a private aura. Yeah. That and then like I feel like for melee it kind of sucks because like during igniting growth, the outside of the room will grow. Obviously, part of igniting growth is if you're not on a wall, it'll like spawn fire under you. But like even if you're on a wall, the wall's constantly going in. So like not getting ticked is like insanely annoying. And trying to find the exact, it's hard to tell visually how close you need to be to fire to not spawn new fire while also not getting ticked on. Just seems like kind of weird. I think that deserves a knock to it. I'm looking at this list. If you put this boss in C, you're saying this boss is like Senarth or Primal Council, and it's 100% better than both of those things.
Yeah, I think a B is.
So it's like it's not as good as Kurog though. So it's like
bottom of B.
Bottom of B maybe. Yeah,
bottom of B, top of C, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I think B. I think you could say top of C, bottom of B. I will give it. It's a really really fun healer boss, and it is the best version they've ever made of a, like, you know, what was that green dragon in ICC?
Valithria?
Yeah, like Valithria, and you know, Sulong and whatever, like just all of those healer fights that have existed in WoW's history. I think this is the singular best one they've made. So I think it gets points for that. Sun King, yeah, that kind of stuff. Someone said Sun King better. That's actually wrong. That's fine though. Okay, all right, Naimu. Again, I'm just gonna start with this. The walking up to do Naimu, maybe this is a melee diff, but like Naimu's great. You just fucking hit the boss and dodge some lines and do an intermission and hit the. I don't know. Like I actually really enjoy doing Naimu. Now that I've done it a few times. But ranged are also like constantly running around and soaking things. So I'm not sure. I'll let chat give their how it feels to just go up to the boss. But we've talked about this recently. But how do you feel about this boss design wise?
Yeah, I mean, I think also there's a difference here if you're walking up with like 20 gamers versus if you're walking up with like the people that are going to be reaching this boss later and later with more and more suspicious gamers are going to be finding it more and more frustrating to prog this, because you're just going to keep wiping to, like, you know, Jimothy getting stunned again or something and dying in his dying to another line, right? And it's just like not something that you can solve strategically at all. And it is another one of those fights where you're kind of just waiting, and you know, every time somebody dies to it, they're gonna be like, "What? I couldn't see that," you know. So that part I think is one that you're gonna have a more positive sentiment if you're in like a really good guild about it than if you're in a later to kill bosses guild. I think that part's gonna be more annoying.
Dude,
I do think though that it's I mean, I think it does its job pretty well. Like you do the fight. It's kind of just like heroic, but more punishing. It's got a slight mythic twist to it. You have to do a little bit of organization with moving people, you know, to the different sides at different times. But other than that, you're kind of just executing a simple set of mechanics, and the numbers cranked up.
Yeah, and I've been like kind of gauging how do the people feel. It's a lot of A. They're like better than Kurog, a lot of A. Some like high B, low A. But I've also seen, this is probably a topic for a totally other video. I've seen a couple of Vokers actually say, this fight with 25-yard range feels horrific.
Yeah.
And I think a maybe podcast topic, maybe getting a Voker on or something, is the 25-yard, I guess 30 yards for preservation, is that experiment good? Do they continue with this? Does the movement make up for the range? Because I've heard specifically in this raid, the end of the raid feels horrible with the lower range, like on Fyrak and Tindril. So
yeah, I've heard that as well. I remember being really concerned about that in Vault, and then they like designed a bunch of fights that it didn't matter on because they just had like infinitely large hitboxes or whatever. But this tier is definitely something that I've heard them complaining about.
Okay, so I would say A for this. I think Naimu's better than Kurog. I think Naimu's better than Laradar. I think Naimu's better than all these fights. I think it's just not as good as those. There's not really another boss. The only bosses that I would compare, like Kurog and Naimu are probably close. Kurog is simpler, but I mean Naimu is really also just as simple, really.
Yeah, looking at these bosses, I like it better than all of the bosses below it. So,
the only thing I don't like about Naimu is I think the fight would be significantly better if the explosions that happen after you soak a green circle were like 50% the size. I think it would accomplish the same thing and be infinitely less annoying.
Yeah, 100%.
That would be one change that would just instantly make the fight better. But I think it's still going A. I'll put it here. I think I don't think it's like fucking almost S, you know? I think like Gnarl Root, maybe Amalgamation Chamber came up there, but okay. All right, we are at the banger tier. We are at these bosses are all really fucking hard tier. So where do we start? I guess we can start from the first raid, which is weird. Actually, no, it's weird because Broodkeeper in the first raid, it went straight from like weird mid-tier fight to second to last boss instantly. There was no Smolderon in that raid. It just went straight from the wing ends to second to last.
Yeah. Depending on the guild, I think Dathia may have hit that spot for you, but it would depend.
Yeah. Okay, let's just start. Let's not do the second to last bosses yet. So I'll actually just put them in order. I'll just put Razageth over here at the end. We'll put the end bosses at the end, and all the second to last bosses right before that. And now we kind of have a idea of where we're going. Okay, so we have to talk about Smolderon, Skarn, and Magmarax. Do you have anywhere you want to start in particular?
Let's see. We were just nice, so let's talk about Skarn to change things up a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean Skarn. So I know you're a Skarn enjoyer.
Well, I'm not going to taint the entire ranking of Skarn because of my opinion, but I will put it out there that our progression of Skarn felt awesome. We did the whole fight organically. We only did the wall like the last 4% of the fight as a total YOLO thing, and it felt fucking sick. So like every person that did Skarn in our guild was like, this is just a pretty good hard mid-raid boss. I'm sure there was, there's 20 people. I'm sure some people didn't like it and some people did, but like it was a good boss to progress. But almost everyone else in the world, even starting from the second world kill, you're doing like a fifth of that boss on the wall. And then like a few more kills later, you're doing 100% of the boss on the wall, right? So like that was a huge meme. It had an extremely controversial nerf timing. So like that was weird because then like people just extended if they got the kill, like kind of defined Hall of Fame. Yeah, and then maybe at the end of all of it, if you were not one of the first 20 guilds in the world to kill this boss, but you killed it maybe post nerf, and then maybe you killed it in farm, what was the feeling walking up to Skarn? Was it oh man, after all the previous drama is over, it's just you now have to kill Skarn again?
Well, I think you didn't walk up to Skarn and you instead did the skip because it was that bad as soon as you could, right?
Oh yeah, I guess there's only two versions. There's the people who did Skarn initially and never killed it ever again or did the skip. And then there's people who went back to kill Skarn after not doing it for potentially months. And then you had to kill a boss you haven't seen in months, and then people are mad, and then you're killing a boss that you don't know how to kill. Oh man, it's all bad, isn't it?
I mean, it just has to go in Swamp.
This is not good.
This is a case of like, I think the version that you guys fought of this boss was cool, but man, it just did so much bad stuff, and the way that they nerfed it in a sense that made it actually harder for most people by quite a bit and much more annoying for everybody. And then the timing of that as well, mid reset, was just egregious. I think that's something that I think that's like the biggest debacle of a raid this expansion by a lot.
Bro, people were so mad about the nerfs in this boss. They were like going after the dev's family and shit. Like it was bad.
Which let's clarify. No amount of swamp tier justifies that. But
oh yeah. Also interesting tidbit I found out. That nerf timing was not up to the person who nerfed this boss.
Yeah, of course.
I did not know that, but that person who nerfed this boss had nothing to do with the nerf timing. Probably not very public information. So he was getting slandered for absolutely no reason. The nerfs weren't good either, but yeah.
Yeah.
Also, don't slander
devs. The problem
devs.
as well was that it did make the fight more annoying and more difficult, and it made it more difficult in a more annoying way. They did eventually turn it into, I think, a reasonable. Like if they had found the thing where it's like it spawns on the two farthest and the two closest, if they'd found that nerf sooner, I think it would have been okay. But that was, I guess, hard to find.
Yeah. Okay. So we're good with Skarn at the very end. Let's finish that up with Magmarax as well then.
Yeah, I mean this fight, the thing that it had going for it was that I guess healers quite enjoyed it. People were kind of bleeding out. It was kind of an interesting fight for like player skill of pressing personals and that kind of stuff, but it really did not live up to its position in the raid, especially following after Rashok of being like a fun patchworky fight. It had this sort of weird strategy you do for it where you just it felt like you were doing what you would do at the end of the fight at the start, where you're just kind of holding it in place and burning it, and then you start like doing this movement instead towards the end because of the way it was designed, which that part always felt weird to me, that it felt like inverted from how it should have been with space and stuff. And then, the room is like slowly filling up with fire, but you're never actually feeling like, oh man, like firefighter Mimiron style.
Yeah, there was no epicness whatsoever to this fight, for sure. Yeah. All of the difficulty was in the numeric. It was killing it in time and it was healing it. It was a really, really fun healer fight, as you mentioned. I will say, what was the boss I said I was a shrinker on earlier? Was it fucking Council or? I think it was
Council Dreams.
Okay, yeah. Dude, Magmarax I think is a grower on everyone. I think this fight had such a bad entrance. It was like, why is this fight here? We already fought Rashok. Rashok was better. Why is Rashok not in this spot instead of Magmarax? And then in like the Race to World first, especially in that absolutely changes public opinion. Like people wanted this super epic sludge fist fucking face off, and it just was just this piss boss that instantly died, right? But then you saw every guild at the top. I felt like we should have 2-shot this boss. Well, maybe 5 or 6 shot because we were the ones that had to figure it out. But I expected like Echo and Method to 2-shot this boss, right? We took 18 pulls. They took 18 pulls. A lot of guilds feel like they're going to pull up to this boss and just like one-shot it, and it takes 20 pulls or something.
A lot of guilds took 40 or 50 as well. And the thing about that is that you always felt like you were inting somehow. But like if everybody's feeling that way on this boss, then you know, that's not just each guild sucks.
And then if you are just a gamer, you are someone who just, you know, zones in and does a boss. Maybe a lot of you guys didn't do this because you started skipping Skarn from a very early time. But there was not bad feelings when we were walking up to Magmarax and farm. I would say like the approval rating of this only went up over time, not just from healers, but just from people doing it. It didn't feel like shit. Like if you were re-clearing Magmarax, and not a lot of you did, and maybe your opinion never changed on it because you did it once and never did it again, it seems to exclusively have just only gone up over time.
Yeah, I think it was a good farm boss, but it was a bad, you know, it was a good farm boss that you never farmed because of it being after Zaskarn. So I would say, I think I agree that it's better than we gave it credit for, even in like the month or two after the tier. I don't know when we actually last talked about it. I don't think it's a good
designed
fight,
yeah, it's not a good fight. It's not a good fight, and it was design failure, like for sure design failure. Like
yeah,
100% was not designed well.
I think C though.
Yeah,
like I think I would have
C.
said D. There was a time where I maybe would have argued for like a swamp on this.
There was a time where everyone would. Bro, if you were to rank Magmarax during the Race World first and leading up to the Race World first, it is swamp. And if you ranked it later on in farm, it would have been, or like a little bit, like a month in a farm would be D. I think it's C. Like it's for sure not as bad as Volcross and Igira. Ain't no way.
All right.
But
C sounds good.
It's kind of hard to compare it against the other things in this row, but I mean, I'm just going to put it in somewhere in C. I don't know.
That's cool. Yeah, you can always do this thing that I do during tier lists where you just kind of pretend that they're not relative to each other within a tier unless you're trying to make a point. And then you
that makes the most sense. I mean, because how do you compare Magmarax and Senarth? Like, what are you fucking doing? Like, yeah. Okay, we are on to the big Smoldy.
Yeah.
We talked about this a lot recently, but Smolderon wasn't Sludge Fist, right? But I think Smolderon was really good. I actually did Smolderon recently, and we actually did it in like a pretty painful alt raid. Like I don't know if you guys have tried to do Smolderon with like a lot of melee. By a lot, I mean like fucking a lot. Like you have like 3 ranged or something. Like you have your raid buffs, and then there's not even BM hunters. Like there's just only melee. But it makes this fight way fucking harder and kind of hell on earth. So we, in our first like alt kill of Smolderon like 3 weeks ago or something, it was like a struggle. And usually when you're struggling in an alt raid, feelings are bad. But I was fucking having a blast. I thought this fight was awesome. Like I was just like fucking flying around and doing all kind of like learning to dodge the tornadoes, and like I don't know, it's just like when you're just doing this fight, it fucking owns. The only thing that I think is like kind of, I still feel like they're overthinking a little bit on the damage amp fights. Just make it on the timer where cooldowns come up, you know? Like don't do the a minute and 10-second burn and then it's a minute and 47 seconds. So like, oh, you don't have your 2 minutes up. And it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, don't do all that. Like I just think that's not fun. It's way easier, and it's probably also way easier to tune if you know when all the damage is happening rather than like expecting people to like turbo min max. I don't know. I don't know. What's your take on Smolderon?
Yeah, so I would be feeling S, except I think the private aura seeking orbs macro situation is taking at least a full tier, probably exactly a full tier off of this thing.
No, I agree with you.
For me, puts it down into A, because I agree. It's like, it's a fun fight to do. It's a fight that I enjoy walking up to. It's not a fight that I enjoyed, especially because when we got there was not a Liquid Week or a pack available for us to yoink, which makes it a lot better, I think, for people doing it later. But instead
I didn't realize how many people use those. I had no idea. I looked at Waga recently, and it was like,
yeah,
here's the most downloaded weak ores, and it's like the fucking our Amir Drasil pack by far.
Yeah, I mean, it's you've got to use them nowadays because, like, I mean, you don't have to. There's a good Northern Sky pack that we ended up finding and using. Reload's Guild, but we also, that, you know, had just come out by the time we were on this fight, so we didn't actually find it. So we were trying to prog this as, you know, Hazakostas intended for about an hour and a half, and that is just not. I don't know how they thought you were like we were trying to have people call out that they were going to go, and like I mean it kind of worked, but it was so clearly so inferior to a macro system for this. And I don't know, I'm just so disappointed by this the way that these auras and these mechanics have worked out, because I do not enjoy getting 20 people to like troubleshoot a macro and like understand how the macro weak aura interacts and stuff. And I felt like we would have lost another like 20 or 30 pulls at least if we tried to do it without setting up the weak aura, which I don't think is good. So to me, that's like a really, really bad thing about an otherwise really good fight that would be S tier otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is probably fair to say. I think any boss where you have to press a macro to do a mechanic to make a weak aura work is automatically not S tier. Like, it just can't be. I think that's just bad. Or maybe the fight is good. Maybe it's possible. Like, you could argue Firac is S tier even though you do that in the first intermission, maybe. But yeah, I don't know. I think I would go as far as to agree with you. But there are people. So something that I think might be kind of interesting for guilds. For guilds that are progressing Smolder on now, I want to hear some of your all's opinions. Have you guys tried? So now that they nerfed the threat thing, which really don't understand why they did that. If you guys don't know what that is, basically the threat table on the boss made weak auras automatically show you who the 4 people were on, so you didn't have to press a macro, and then they removed it. But then by removing it, they also nerfed it so only 3 orbs spawn. Dude, I think you guys might enjoy the boss more if you just call it. Now that there's 3. With 4, way harder. You could do it with 4. There's always a weird conversation. People are just like, oh, you don't need to do anything. Yeah, you don't need to use weak auras. You can clear this entire raid without weak auras. You can clear every raid that's ever existed without a raid leader, a good one. And then you would just do it slower, right? So like you can have one person call things and it can be great, and then you might wipe more, and having a weak aura that might make you wipe less, but obviously everything is always still possible. I would say it may be a lower, just having people in your raid communicate when they have the orbs and saying like 1, 2, 3, or hey, I'll go first, and then you have 3 seconds to figure out who's going second. You guys might have a better time with that than like having people learn to press a macro when they get an orb. Like, it really is a really cringe, unintuitive thing to do, and you might actually just be better to call it. And it's more fun. Something to think about.
Yeah. I know we could have done it that way. I don't think for us it was. I think for us it was like clearly going to cost us double the pull times, double the pull time or something.
It's more. Well, for so when you were doing it, it was impossibly hard to just natty call it. You can do it, but impossibly difficult. Now that there's 3, the amount of time you have to do all 3 is a long time. You could take 15 seconds talking about who is going to go first, and you will still easily do it in time. Like, it's that easy. So like now that it's 3, I'm saying I would suggest that. I would never suggest it with the old 4 timer. The timing's too tight.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you're in a guild where you think the problem is like, okay, if you're in a guild where you don't trust people to figure out how to press the macro, but you do trust all 20 people to like be actually, you know, have a working microphone even in those kind of guilds, right? Like and be, you know, vocal and communicative and like understanding of the way that that's going to work. I think that is a lot of guilds, but there's also a lot of guilds where that's not going to be true, where you have like, you know, 3 people that don't talk or something like that, and then the entire thing is going to fall apart.
Or more just a raid leader thing. It's like, it's just one of those mechanics where having a weak aura determine the order, or having one person just take a little bit away from their playing ability on that fight and just hard call people's names and no one else has to think about it. It's a perfect application for a raid leader doing that. That is one of the scenarios where raid leaders have massive impacts by playing worse on purpose to make everyone else play better.
100%. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Actually, I found the cooldown timing part of this fight to be sort of interesting as well, although, you know, it does make it like harder for them to tune around and figure out what we're going to do with it. But you know, 2-minute fights do get. It's nice that they spiced that up a little bit with this, and I think it worked pretty well. And yeah, the intermissions were fun. I don't know. I do think it was completely S tier in every other way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, if this didn't have the weird private, if private ores did not exist, Smolderon is top of S tier.
Yeah.
Probably like even ahead of Rashok.
I think it still would have maybe suffered a little bit from like, oh, this is slightly undertuned or something for early guilds reaching it maybe, but I don't.
Do people feel that way
deal.
in later guilds? Like people in chat, like, when you guys killed Smolderon, did you feel unfulfilled because it was too easy for you, or is that a Omega Race to World First fan take? A lot of no's. All right.
Which was no? Was no the
no means
I didn't get the like sludge fist feel?
Yeah, no means I felt good when we killed this boss. I didn't feel like it was super easy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, obviously it's like still a satisfying kill, but I didn't get that feeling of like, oh my God, Sludge Fist is bashing against the wall. We've seen this like 7 times before, but this time it's actually so low. Oh my God, we're doing it, right? Like that was something that Smolderon failed to replicate for me.
Yeah. We are done. We are now on the second to last bosses and the final bosses. We will go in order of raids for each. Starting off with probably the weaker of the raids this expansion. We have Broodkeeper and Erazageth. So Broodkeeper was also weirdly kind of a grower, right? Like I feel like Broodkeeper was set up to fail, right? Like think about the second to last bosses that existed before Broodkeeper, right? You had Rygalon, which was the single target absolute fucking banger. And then the two before that were Kel'Thuzad, which was a meme awful ad fight. And then you had Stone Legion Generals, which was a meme awful ad fight. So then there's this narrative where it's like, hey, when the second to last boss is a meme ad fight, it's usually fucking terrible. Stop doing that, right? Like none of the great second to last bosses ever have ever been a meme ad fight. And they made a meme ad fight. That being said, I think Broodkeeper was about as good of a meme ad fight as you could have made. It is miles better than Stone Legion Generals. It is miles better than Kel'Thuzad, which were two of the worst fights ever. I don't think this is an S tier fight, because I don't think a meme ad boss, second to last boss, could maybe even be A. It's just simply by concept of the fight and the way it is constructed, it just simply cannot be this good, which is why I wish they would stop making them forever. But I think it did, with what it had to work with, I think it did about as good as it could do, which I think is probably somewhere in the B tier. But how do you feel about this fight?
Yeah, I'm maybe a little bit lower on it than that. I'd be leaning towards like C for this. I agree that it didn't... it wasn't as offensive as I was expecting, but I don't think it really grew on me that much over farm. Like, I still wasn't looking forward to Broodkeeper or anything like that, right? Like, each week we go into Evolved Incarnates and it's like, oh man, can we just do 2 out of 9? Can we just do Aranog and Primal Council? I don't want to do anything else. And then eventually it's like, oh, you start doing Broodkeeper Razageths in that split or whatever, and or like you after you kill Razageth or whatever, and you take a couple weeks of taking it easy, and then you start doing the later bosses again, and like, I don't know. Broodkeeper was definitely one of the ones you're walking up to it and you're like, man, we have to set up kind of quite a lot of stuff for this. And it's, there's like 3 people with this egg job that's not particularly intuitive, that we kind of can't swap them off of this for all of farm either. And the process of like learning the fight with them learning that job as well it wasn't one of those jobs where you kind of pick the 3 people who want to do it. It's like you picked, 3 people on classes that were good at doing it, and also weren't going to int your raid when doing it, but it was mostly that type of thing. And then, I don't know, if you were on the ad team versus being on the boss team, you had a pretty different life experience as well on that fight too. I think that the way the fight ended was reasonably good and fun. I think that definitely does. But like that kind of part of the fight was where it just it started being a more generic, single target fight, right? The end of the fight. I don't know. I mean, I guess I could be talked into B on this. I do think that it definitely vastly overperformed the swamp expectations that it had. But
so I think it vastly depends on what you do. So I think for almost everyone, and definitely healers, I think P2 Broodkeeper was pretty universally the same experience for everyone.
Yeah.
P1, if you were doing ads and you were just running around and you actually had like good ad damage allocation, which means you weren't AFKing in between ad packs, and you were just like constantly AoEing. I don't know. It's kind of fun. You're just walking around and AoE and shit. All good. Those people are having fun. But then there are the people who are doing eggs. I think maybe there's a low chance, probably like eggs were not a super fun job. I think tanking the boss was like really stressful. You were getting absolutely demolished, and your job was like extremely specific. Like if you just went to the wrong egg pile, everyone's instantly dead. So like it was like memorizing a pattern kind of thing, kind of hit or miss on that. But the people who hate this fight are people who are assigned to do boss damage that were not doing eggs. Holy shit, was that one of the worst fights of all time for those specific people? Because all they do is just follow the boss around, hit the boss, do absolutely nothing, have no chance of dying, and you're just sitting there and people are dying around you to things that you cannot control. And it's just, I mean, there's just if that was you, this fight is swamp, guaranteed. You could not argue. It's just horrible. Actually, it's probably D because the last phase is just kind of good. But like first part of the fight, horrible, right? I think the people who are doing that other stuff, it's like way up there. So I think it's high C, low B, somewhere in there. But it's I don't know if you feel strongly about it or if someone in chat.
Yeah. I think I'd rather put it high C than low B, but I don't feel strongly enough. I'd be fine to leave this to the first 10 comments we see in chat.
Yeah, no, but no, they're saying high, yeah, a lot, same thing. We'll just do it high C because that's a drink.
I will say as well, the tank thing on this fight was interesting too, because if you were doing this as a protection warrior, you were just like full clenched the whole time. It was a tremendous danger. The boss was just like slapping you around, and then you'd log into your DK and play this fight, and it was just you could not die. You were vibing. You'd press anti-magic shell, and the boss couldn't do anything to you, and it was just checkmate, and that was funny.
Yeah. All right.
One of the most like trivialized based on what tank spec you were playing.
Okay. We have the big Tindril. No, that's made up. We have Echo of Neltharion. So I think this boss sucks. I think they really fucked it up. I think this should have been an awesome fight. I've showed this. I'm not going to do it now. If you guys want to go watch a previous video where we talk about this, I showed some PTR footage of Echo of Neltharion, and the fight actually makes sense. You don't need weak auras to deal with the volcanic hearts because the fight is designed for you to break extra walls so you have infinite more room. And then the fight goes live, they make you never want to break walls, so you have to fit them into this tight formation, which required the weak aura. So a lot of people will point to private auras being bad on this fight, which they were, but they were only bad and only necessary because they absolutely fucked boss design. And that's a huge, huge knock on any fight. Doing this fight wasn't even really that fun, especially in P2. And in the last phase, you had like these, I don't know, just like maps and weak auras and private auras, and that stained this boss's reputation. And also, less than reputation, it like dictated how you progress this fight. This is probably the first fight in WoW's history where you actually felt like you were progressing a weak aura more than the actual encounter itself. That's pretty dog shit. Really a shame because I think this could have been really cool, but yeah, they totally fucked it up. So where are you at?
Yeah, I'm less harsh on the private aura side of this because it was the first tier where they had private auras, and so I think to some extent, even though some of us were like sounding the alarm about this, I don't think you want to be too harsh on people making the mistake for the first time. So compared to like Fyrak first intermission, I think this is a lot less egregious there that we were progressing a weak aura for as much as we were on this fight. I think that the mechanics themselves, though, like you said, were just not... Private aura or no, P1 was badly bungled with the volcanic heart mechanic. I don't know. I think it was kind of fun. P1 was still kind of fun to play. P2 was still kind of fun to play. P3 was still kind of fun to play. I mean, the nature of like planning out all of your portals and having that be super duper, you needed 20 people to go into 20 portals, and they spawned in pretty deterministic positions based on boss positioning, and so you kind of had to like pre-plan that out 100%. I thought that was kind of bad as well, but it was also fun when you got it right and when you actually did it. But it wasn't really fun to learn it, but it was fun to do it. So I don't know. I'm pulled in a lot of different directions on this fight. I do think more bad than good.
Yeah. Like, is this a swamp tier fight?
I don't think it's quite swamp. I'd rather say D for this than swamp. I think that there is merit to this
I can
fight.
see the swamp argument. I could see your guild's experience on Echo of Neltharion being very swamp and like and wanting to fight anyone that says anything otherwise. But I also don't think that happened to every guild. But I could see it happening to a lot. Yeah.
I would not blame anybody who wants to put this in swamp for themselves, but I do think like in a bigger picture, I think there's some silver linings to this one. All right, the whole chat's saying swamp. I don't know. That's this might be another case where I'm out of touch.
Yeah, maybe we're wrong.
Oh, somebody says A. Hang on.
Okay.
Another person says A. All right. Well,
okay. Now we have to meet in between. So now it's B or C.
Yeah. Dang.
I'm just gonna leave it in D. I'm gonna leave it in D, in between Volcaros and Agira.
All right.
Which is an awesome place to be for a second to last boss. All right. Time for old Tindril. Now Tindril has the opposite problem of, what is it? Where was the boss we were talking about? Magmarax. So Magmarax had this like Race to World first huge letdown because everyone got to watch it and it was super underwhelming and it was like whatever. And then people did Magmarax more and more and the opinion only went up. I think Tindril is having similar things now. So Tindril for us is amazing. I feel bad for anyone that had to do 3-second seeds. It was completely bullshit. Like just a bad mechanic. Like it's just it can just be bullshit. I know you did it a bit.
Yeah, We did it. I liked doing them, but I hated wiping to them, but I will say it was very satisfying every time you did it successfully.
All I'm saying is, and this may be a people being frustrated that they're on the boss too long, I think Tindral was like an incredible fight. I think they figuring out this boss was amazing. Doing the boss amazing. The like flying around through beams and shit and like landing on roots had a lot of good stuff going for it. That being said, I think as time has gone on, I think it's so you want to immediately say S, one of the best bosses ever. That's how I feel. But I have seen growing negative sentiment from people who are doing this fight now. And maybe that is less about Tindral in its original form, because Tindral has a different experience for everyone. You may not realize this, but you fight certain versions of bosses every raid. Not everyone fights the world first version of these bosses. In fact, if you guys have been fighting the version of these bosses we were fighting on world first at the eye level we were fighting it at, you guys would probably rank a lot of these bosses that are high right here very low. Like, dude, if you guys did Rashok at our eye level, you all would fucking hate this fight. You'd quit WoW because of this fight, right? Tindral, I think, took too long to get nerfed. So I think there was like this bubble of guilds that usually fight the less hard versions of these fights, and it didn't get nerfed in time, and they just felt like shit progressing it. And you could definitely see that on like Twitter and Twitch and all kinds of stuff. And then they nerfed Tindral multiple times. And I still think, and it was weird though, they nerfed Tindral, but at the same time they were nerfing all the good classes that everyone was bringing. So like the nerfs didn't feel, super awesome. We're still also getting like an eye level about a week from Crest. So like our gear's constantly getting better, but I don't know. I don't know where to stand. Like my opinion, I think this is one of the best fights they've ever made. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I loved doing this fight. I think it's of the bosses this expansion, this was the second best feeling to kill behind Fireack of all the fights, right? Like, I think obviously for you guys killing Sarkarath is going to be a very good feeling, but like for me personally, neither Sarkarath nor Razagath really gave like as much of a blast of adrenaline as Tindral was. So I thought Tindral was really sweet. I thought it was good. I agree with you that it's very important that they nerf this appropriately. I think that the speed of nerfs here is actually probably good, and the problem isn't so much with the Tindral nerfs. I think it's more with
how unbalanced this raid was with classes.
Yeah, the fact that you would get 6 out of 9 so quickly if you're a Hall of Fame guild, that you would be pulling Tindral by the 3rd week when you have no hope of killing it until like the 5th or 6th week. And that way, like, this fight should not have needed to get nerfed, because people should have been that were at that level should have been spending more time on like Laradar and Naimu, Volcaros. Those should have taken more of those raid hours, but because this tier had such a hollow start to it for high-end guilds, that led to you, once you killed, like you'd get to Smolderon. Smolderon was hard. At some point you would overcome that though, because it wasn't that hard, and then you would be pulling a Race to World First boss pretty much at that point, that's wild. So I think that is the problem with Tindral, and I don't think it's fair to take too many points directly off of Tindral for that.
Yeah.
I think it should still be rated very highly.
And then I think there's also a weird thing where there are bosses that killing them first and then killing them again is very easy. And then there's killing them with new people being easy. I don't know if anyone's done this yet, because we haven't done this yet. We've killed Tindral, but only with the same comp every single week. Not because we couldn't, we just have, I guess. We do a second raid. Has anyone tried to re-kill Tindral with like 4 or 5 new people yet? Because I feel like that would be fucking awful. Like,
yeah, like
really bad. Like, there's
this has got to be the worst fight to introduce somebody new to. Even like midway through Prague, if you're in a guild that that has people like miss a day, which does happen.
Oh my god, yeah.
Like, could you imagine you're just coming in and you're trying to have like somebody subbing in after 200 pulls to this fight? And I mean, yeah, that part is pretty visceral about this one.
Yeah, like, dude, if you're like playing during the holidays and you have like 3 or 4 players out, like you just don't pull this boss, right?
Just
like,
don't pull the boss. Yeah,
you don't pull the boss.
No, there's no point. You're not going to accomplish anything. Which I think that is. I mean, that's probably there is need for more nerfs to Tindral in the current world we live in. Like,
so.
That's something it definitely needs soon. But I don't know. I'm very happy that I got the opportunity to fight the versions of this boss that I fought and ended up killing. Like, that was
no, I agree.
Was really special.
Okay, where are we putting Tindy?
I still want to put it in S. I don't know. I think it's too.
Yeah, I agree.
It's too good. I think it's an S, and I think that if they don't nerf it like in the next reset or two, I would be fine putting it down to A in protest or whatever.
And I don't think this is super important for ranking, but I also think visually this is one of the coolest looking fights ever. Like just everything that's happening. If you're looking at it as a spectator, if you're doing the fight, it just looks fucking really cool.
Yeah. That's definitely. I mean, and also again, just the fact that they swung at the dragon riding fight and hit this hard, despite everybody being like, "Please do not do a dragon riding fight." Dragon riding's cool, but I never want to deal with it in a raid.
Dude,
like, I mean, that's just
have
inspired.
have they earned the benefit of the doubt of like us critiquing them making fights about their expansion bit? Like they did like we were like, don't make an anima power boss, don't make an anima power boss. They make one and it kind of rocks, and then like we were like, oh, they're gonna do a fucking. You all saw No Kid Offensive. They're gonna do a dragon riding boss. Oh man, I hope it's like the second boss so we can just get this shit over with. They're like, nah, fuck you. It's gonna be the second to last boss. It's gonna be one of the hardest bosses ever, and it's gonna be awesome. And they were right. And that's kind of insane. Like they've gone 2 for 2 on the weird expansion bit raid boss thing. So
yeah, I don't want to give it. You know, I reserve the right to make pre-raid, complaining about stuff and then be wrong later. But yeah, it's definitely very impressive out of them.
Oh, we're on the end bosses. Holy moly. Razageth. This boss sucks for sure. Like turbo sucks.
I remember always having to give the disclaimer like mythic only because the heroic version of this fight was sick. But yeah, this is
absolute stinker. Yeah.
Not what we're hoping to see out of an end boss. 17-minute long encounter. Approximately, okay, it was 14 minutes or whatever, but still, like, it was a really long fight. Just some of the most unnecessary intermissions known to man.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could make the argument in most fights that are super long, like 12, 13, 14-minute end bosses, you could remove one of the intermissions or one of the phases and the fight is just objectively better. This fight you could have removed 2, just straight up. And I'm just going to go ahead and ignore, because again, Race to World First perspective isn't super relevant. Like, that's going to affect my opinion. Like, obviously, worst ever. You never even felt like you were progressing Razageth. You progressed P1, and then, like, you didn't progress the P1 intermission. You just did it until it was nerfed, and then it was easy. And then you did P2, and it was impossible, and then they nerfed it, and then it was easy. And then you did P3, it was impossible, and then they nerfed it, and then it was fucking easy as hell, right? So, like, Race to World First-wise, this was one of the worst bosses to progress ever. It's super, super not fun. But, like, let's just remove all of that. This fight is so fucking bad. It's 14 minutes. Multiple classes rely on a fucking dragon to keep them on the platform constantly. It has the opposite of difficulty curve in an actual fight. What you'd like in a fight is an easy, relatively easier P1 into, as the fight goes on, it gets harder. This fight, P1 is by far the hardest thing. And then you do this weird ad phase. And then you do P2, which is significantly easier than P1. And then you do this another weird ad phase. And then you do the last phase, which is significantly easier than every other portion of the fight. That anytime a fight is like that ever, especially an end boss, that's a horrible encounter. That's just, it feels bad to do. You feel empty when it dies. It's just one of the worst mistakes you can make when you're designing bosses like that. You could have removed either intermission or both, and the fight is better. Horrible sign for a fight. 14-minute end bosses, just objectively worse than 10. I think they learned a lot this expansion. They did 2 sub 10-minute end bosses this expansion. They were 2 of the best end bosses in a while. So, I think that's definitely something to go towards. I think closer to 10 than 7, but like 10-minute end bosses. The list of sub 10-minute end bosses in history of WoW are, and we'll get to 2 of these right after this, but are Blackhand. This is in modern WoW since Mists of Pandaria. It is Blackhand, Sire Denathrius, Fyrakk, and Sarkreth, right? I would say Fyrakk, Sire Denathrius, and Blackhand are on a higher level than Sarkreth, but those are 4 great fights, right? If you start going above that, they kind of get worse. So, I think Razageth fucking sucks. I think it's the worst end boss they've made in a long time. I don't know what rank it goes in though.
Yeah, I feel like D is more appropriate than Swamp for Raz. I don't think it's egregious. I think the Race World First version of this and the Race World First side of it certainly would be Swamp.
You would add Rose below here for the Race World First, yeah.
But I think that for generic end boss, I don't know. I don't like P1 was really hard, and it sucked to be one of the people that needed an evoker or something like that. But at least I did have fun progging some of P1, much of P2. P3 was a fun phase, even though it was anticlimactic. I think that's enough for me to keep it out of Swamp, but I'm not.
What did you play in P1? What class?
Bot Warrior. So I
So
had
a class,
pretty easy time
so a
of it.
class that charged, and leaped every single.
Well, okay. The other
knockback.
thing I could have been playing would have been Blood DK, and I would have pressed Death's Advance and then
Yeah.
not moved. So
Yeah.
that was harder than that.
Yeah, but what about like 80% of the rest of the raid? You know, like
yeah.
they
Yeah, it
have
was
a
funny to
very
watch him
different
fall off.
opinion.
Yeah.
Not even falling off, like just getting RNG picked my class 10 to 15 seconds of downtime fucking running again. I don't know. It's just like it gets old, you know. It's not
Yeah.
that is a fine gimmick. It is not something you want to do 200 times, you know, over and
Yeah.
over again. So,
That's fair. I mean, if I'm not, I don't want to defend this thing from Swamp. If that's where the tides are blowing on this one, I'd be fine with that.
I'm okay with D.
My instinct would be D.
Yeah, I would say D. I put it in D. Okay. Sarky. This is a weird one because I feel like Sark is kind of like the Agira of end bosses in a way. Like Agira is a fight in Sepulchre that I rank extremely highly because we had like 7 hours of progression on that boss. It was trying a bunch of different combos. And...
Wait, Agira?
Oh no, sorry, not Agira. You know what fuck the
Dosegni?
the boss
No.
opposite of Halandris on the other wing.
Oh, Lehuvim?
Lehuvim. Oh my god, why did I say Agira? Yeah, Lehuvim, where our experience on that boss was super fun because we kept like killing different constructs and like figuring out the best way to do it, like as a group, not me, like as a group we're like trying and moving around different things, and then we kill it and we felt awesome, right? And then everyone else's experience on it on Lehuvim is just doing exactly what we do, and it's just doing a fight, and it's like there's nothing going on here, right? So it's like totally different. Sarkareth is just like that in the last phase. The last phase, the whole like where you go down, how do you deal with all this stuff, that was a very cool and interesting puzzle to solve. So I feel like I will always feel, as a raid, not just me, we all figured this out, like that is a cool thing that not a lot of bosses do, and that was really fun. For a lot of people, you just either did what we did or you did what Echo did. Actually, that's not true. As this fight got done more and more, people actually like did a bunch of different, and those are my favorite bosses where people get to kind of cook on their own and they get to come up with like after the boss is nerfed, typically the best way to kill it is not how us or Echo did it. Like there's a new better strategy, and usually people just copy what we do and don't think about it, but people actually did come up with multiple different P3s after progression because of the way this fight operated when it was nerfed. So that was actually really cool. So
even we did some we mix and matched parts of what Echo and you guys did, because like, you know, looking at comps and it's like, oh, the rep pally is kind of important for how this works or whatever, like, and we don't have one of those or something like that, right? Like you see those things, and that actually changes how you want to do a lot of the third phase of the fight. So I think I agree it had less like learning and more maybe copying, especially in P1 and P2, but I think P3 did a good enough job of being like a fight where if you're trying to fight the end boss on Mythic, you have to do some strategizing and like figuring out why Echo and Liquid did what they did, which I think is as much as you can hope for.
Yeah, exactly. And also, this fight did a great job of rewarding you for doing mechanics, right? Like, the bombs were, like, the super annoying thing, and not everyone wanted to do them, but there were a few classes that, like, were volunteering to do this mechanic because it was great for their damage because of the haste they got. But then, like, a Devastation Evoker or a BM Hunter wouldn't want to do that because the time they would spend down is actually... That haste... The downtime is not worth the buff, right? So, like, I thought that was really fun. We can break it down phase by phase. I think if you were to just look at Sarkareth from P1 and P3 alone, I think this is an S tier fight, and I think it's one of the best fights they've made. I think P1 Sarkareth specifically, I think that P1...
I think it's the best P1 they've ever done, yeah.
Yeah, the P1 Sarkareth is, like, incredibly good on all levels. Tanking, healing, DPS, health bar, all of it. Just, P1 Sarkareth is just incredible. P2, we've kind of talked about this before. It leaves a bit to be desired, right? It's like this weird, hey, we're going to teach you how P3 works, kind of, but do like half the mechanics, and like there's these ads and stuff. If you remember, I had like an interview with them because I was like, is it intentional that like this raid is just like all single target and like there's like no ads or whatever? And then they just like fucking threw a bunch of ads on Sarkareth afterwards. So like it's kind of like this P2 was like this makeshift, like, oh, we can make this an ad phase kind of, but I don't know, it just never really made sense. I don't think it's an awful phase. It doesn't feel terrible on P2, but like it's just weird. But P3 was awesome. So I don't know. I think Sarkareth is awesome. What is your Sark take?
Yeah, I think Sark is a very good end boss as well. I think it lacks a little bit of
Epicness, maybe?
yeah, like genius or brilliance. Like it would feel, I think, wrong for me to put it in S, but I think a very high A would be where I would be leaning towards for this. And I think the P1 is just fantastic. It was this really great. I mean, they made this P1 where it's like basically none of it is like strategy. It's all just doing it right, and it's like really hard. And it's one of those phases where you look at it after you've progged it and you spent like 50 pulls learning how to do this phase, and you're like, wow, that was only 1 minute and 40 seconds. You know, this felt longer than that. And anytime that's true about a boss, like the other bosses you say that about are bosses like Tindril, right, where it's just like, wow, this has only been a few minutes. Like it feels so much longer than it actually is, because it's just such a high density of mechanics that keep you engaged. P2 really dropped the ball on that. P2 is, you know, the opposite of that, where you're like, that one feels like longer than it is, for the wrong reason of like the reason why it feels like a 1 hour detention is a 3 hour detention, because you're just so bored. But P3 is great too. Yeah, I think this fight was very good. I wouldn't hate S for it, but I would lean towards high A.
Okay. I put it high A. Yeah, that's fine. I agree with all those things. All right, so let's see where we're stacking up here. Pretty good leading up to Fire Act. So Fire Act's weird. P1 I don't think is as good as Sarkareth.
Agreed.
I think the P1 intermission is really problematic due to private auras specifically. I think P2 of Fire Act is actually just at the best an incredibly mid phase. Like it's just kind of there. I think they just cooked too long on P2, and I think P3 is awesome. Like really, really fucking cool, very unique, really hard. Actually, I don't know if a lot of people will have the opinion of P3 is super cool in the future, because I've noticed with gear levels now, especially on some of our reclears, we actually kill the boss before the 4th APOC roar. Is that the normal thing for guilds now? You kill the boss before the 4th APOC roar?
We killed it after, but we killed it like not long after, so we skipped the 2 blazes before the 5th roar, which
that's the same thing. That's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So beating the 4th APOC roar is the same thing as beating the blazes after the 4th APOC roar, because that's where all the wipe conditions happen.
That's right. You're doing blazes with 8 seeds out, which is something we did a little bit of that during Prague, but when we killed it, we ended up just having enough damage to just, you know, beat that part of the fight. Which, yeah, I do think a lot of P3 is like that is the hardest and most, you know, intense part of P3. I think all of P3 is like joyous to play, though. I think starting from just the beginning of P3, it's just so much fun all the way through. It does ramp up in intensity in a really, I mean, I think it's just such a genius way that phase works. So, I mean, your take on this fight, I think, is pretty much my take on this fight. Like, the first intermission really sucks. The second phase sucks quite a bit. The first phase is nothing to write home about, and I think the third phase is good enough to just redeem all of that.
Yeah, that's pretty, yeah. And then the last phase, like, okay, if you're skipping the blazes after the 4th APOC roar, if you guys, this is the most watched Race World First of all time. You guys watched Echo and Us for a day, like just fucking, this boss could die any pull, right? That was all happening after the 4th APOC roar and those blazes, that entire time. If the boss just died before getting to that 5th blaze, the boss would have died a day and a half ago. Like, that is all of the difficulty there, and almost that is gone. So I feel like people's opinion of Fire Act, if they had to grind out a pull living 2 sets of blazes, like, people would not, it would just be, people would be really down by that phase. But, you know, they never had to go through that. So I think they kind of cut out the worst part while still getting all the fun out of it. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that they barely missed on the first intermission. Like, we actually did this. Our third pull of the intermission in progression ever. We're the only people on the boss. We did it. We saw it the first time. We talked about it. We had a week or in development, but we hadn't had it made yet. And we just YOLO'd the intermission and we did it. We saved our CDs for it. We popped all our CDs. We YOLO'd the fire. We had like general spots, but like we had a few floaters, and we did it without a weak aura entirely. It was possible, yes. There's an incredible amount of variance with people getting random debuffs every time. It'll just always look different. You'd wipe to it a million times, even now the blazes have been nerfed and stuff like that. But like you'd just wipe to it a million times. But man, it's so close. Like if you YOLO'd that phase and you never used a weak aura, which I don't really know. Like I feel like the intermission would have been positively viewed, right? Like think about doing it.
If it was possible to do that consistently, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
But it's literally private auras. Like private auras alone, macroing private auras, whatever, assignments, is just annoying as fuck and less intuitive and fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 30-second phase. I made guides for each phase of this fight, and it's a 10-minute video. And it is the one that I've gotten the most questions about of all the phases in the fight as well, is like setting up weak auras on that phase, right? And like troubleshooting weak auras. You know, people DM me asking me about that much more than they ask me about like, hey, you know, why do you do this in P3, or like how do you move this boss, or any of those sorts of things. Which, I mean, yeah, it's just it's really, really, really bad.
I also I feel like there's something extra with it too, besides like the whole intermission. Like, yeah, if everyone's just like, how do I even set up a weak aura to do this thing? In P1, healers have to dispel on cooldown, and this was a concern we had going into the raid, and it has never felt any different. Healers just think this is super annoying. Like, having to progress your healers dispelling on cooldown. Because the thing is, they have to heal. Like, if any of you guys had to do that too, it'd be like, man, this fucking sucks. You know? Like, oh, God. I think that was a bad mistake. I don't know how they could have done that. I think the idea initially was like, we're going to... Actually, this was in the spell script, I believe. They were going to put out 6 every dispel cooldown. So naturally, you needed to catch up with things like revivals and mass dispels, or... having interesting decision making on like, oh, we are dispelling these, but we have to leave a few, and it didn't hit as hard either. We have to leave a few on like tanks and warlocks and demon hunters and rogues, and like it becomes this interesting, do I dispel this new debuff or do I dispel the rogue who's going higher kind of thing? And that's actually somewhat interesting, but still involves the same annoying thing of I'm pressing my dispel on cooldown. But they didn't want to make it that hard. So they ended up drawing it back and just making it put out exactly as many dispels as you have healers, ideally. And then you're just pressing it on cooldown. I just think bad execution, good idea, bad execution, bad gameplay. And yeah, just kind of leads P1 to just be... P1 looks really fucking cool, right? But like to play it, it just exists. You know, it's not awesome. But you're right. P3 of Fyrak is probably the best thing. Like we talked about Sarkareth, right? P1 owns, P3 owns. Fyrak's P3 is better than everything on Sarkareth, but Fyrak's P1 and P2 are worse than basically every part of Sarkareth, besides maybe P2 of Sarkareth. So like, I don't know where you put this boss. It also looked fucking really cool.
That is true.
I feel like that, Matt. I don't know, where are you feeling?
I kind of want to like say all these nasty things about it and still put it in S. I don't know.
Yeah, like we said earlier that like Smolderon, every boss that makes you press a macro for a weak aura to work gets docked a whole letter grade, but then we're just sitting here like Fyrak still feels like an S tier boss.
I mean, it's just there's this feeling that you get when you're fighting phase 3 of this boss that is just, I don't know, it's just special. Like it's enough for me to look past all the other stuff, but maybe we should still put it in A or something instead.
What's the like chat? Okay, I was gonna ask for the chat take, but I don't know. We're probably getting to a boss where you're gonna see a lot more people typing letters than people who've actually even done this, and they're just giving like race to world first viewer opinions, and that's not really relevant.
Yeah, I mean that was probably true for most of the Emergency bosses that we've done, but I think that. Okay. I think this is also going to be one where the heroic version of this fight kind of sucks too. I don't know if you felt this way about it as well, but like you basically all of heroic, the better your gear gets, the less P3 you do, which is weird. And so you just end up doing more and more
heroic
of the worst parts of this fight.
Kind of stinks, right?
Yeah. So I think that's also going to be coloring our chat's opinion here.
Oh yeah. It's weird. It's like Fyrak is like the opposite of Razageth. Like Razageth had a fucking amazing heroic Razageth. I would actually say heroic Razageth is probably the best heroic boss ever. Like it's heroic Razageth or it's heroic Denathrius. It's like way up there. And then Fyrak is a really, really, really mid heroic fight, and then just incredible mythic. Yeah, I don't know. Let's just put. I mean, it's below Tindral, right? Like Tindral is a better execution of a second to last boss than Fyrak is of an end boss. Like Tindral has less negatives to it than Fyrak does. But also, I don't know.
I think Fyrak has a much more elegant, like, self-nerf of just lopping off the 5th roar phase.
Oh, it's huge, yeah.
Than Tindral does. Tindral has got a much more awkward, like, they have to actually come in here and nerf it properly every couple of resets, or else it's really bad.
Wait, Dorki hit me with a Fyrak sucks. Wait, how far is Dorki into Fyrak?
Let's see. I've seen some clips of different guilds wiping. I don't remember which guild I don't know if he's in one of the guilds that I've seen some...
Very low wipe con.
tragic clips of how people have wiped.
Wait, what is Dorky's take on Fire Axe sucks? One second, I'm gonna call Dorky.
Yeah, Adamant.
I'm adding him in. Why does Fire Axe suck?
Dude, intermission. I don't know how it's possible to do intermission without private auras. I was literally talking about this with Vade last night, and I'm like, they had to have designed this with private auras in mind, because like, how the hell are you supposed to just like, all right, line up in a cargo line and then just like figure it out?
Well, there are on the first set there's like 12 or 13 orbs, and you have 20 people to soak, and then on the second one it's like 16, and then it goes like 18, I think, with like normal room positioning. So the whole like it's never. I don't like using words like possible and impossible because we literally 3-shot it without a weak aura. So it is doable without a weak aura. It is extremely random, and we tried to do it 10 times after that third time without a weak aura, and we wiped. So like it's not like we did it 3 times and we're like, all right, this is fucking piss, and then you're just doing it. Like we were able to do it once in the first 15 tries, and it was on our 3rd try, and then our 2nd time was on the 16th. So like it's extremely hard and variable, but like obviously possible. It's just like very, very, very.
I see. My tinfoil is that like the internal team or whatever. If they can do it, it doesn't have to be consistent, right? But if they can do it, they just kind of shorthand that guilds will be able to prog it and make it consistent. But that's not true for this phase, because you might get screwed if you have people assigned to one side or the other.
Yeah, right. It's so bullshit.
Yeah,
Also,
I agree. I mean, that phase sucks.
I mean, I also think P2 sucks because like if you,
Yeah,
I feel like the reliance on having like so many grips and knocks and like belt knocks and stuff is like, it just feels so gimmicky. Like we were literally talking about this Fire Rack last night with like me, Goop, and Evane, and like P2 just feels so bullshit unless you have like a very specific comp where you can just get everything together.
So it is.
I mean, it's kind of cool when you pull it off.
This is our take so far.
Bullshit.
We have said this. We have said.
Yeah, the question is just, so P3. Do you not love P3?
P3. I think P3 is actually the best part of the fight.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if you guys agree, but like P1 was just kind of whatever, right? It was alright. It was just kind of easy. You just do a dance. And then intermission sucks and P2 sucks. And then like you get to P3 and that's when the fight really begins.
Yeah, so that was our take. Our take was P1's whatever. P1 intermission, weak aura bad. P2 bad phase. P3 so good it makes up for all of that. That is the take.
So are you just thinking like P3 is pretty good, but it's not good enough to make up for all that, BS in the earlier part of the fight?
Yeah, especially because it's like it's kind of short when you get to
That's true.
a later stage. Because like I don't know, like we've been, I think we're killing it tonight. We got it to like 2%, and P3 is just kind of short for us. Like we're just going there at like 43%. We've got Lust going soon, like shortly after we do the first.
Oh yeah, P3's pissed.
Tornado
You're gonna kill before the 4th APOC roar.
Yeah.
It is
we just get,
insanely
like,
dead.
3 seeds or so, and then we just kill the boss.
43%. That's very low. But I guess I don't know what it's like to push Rashok with gear as it is right now.
Yeah, it's a lot easier with gear now. Also, there's no way Senarf is C, man. That is a swamp ass fight. Holy, that is a Sid.
Wait,
fight.
what class did you play Senarth on? DK?
DK, which is like actually like,
It's actually a good
time
fight
in my life.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah,
no,
but
that's why you don't enjoy it.
Yeah,
Because
that's
you
why.
didn't get to do the mechanic.
Yeah, you
of
didn't get to do the
getting ripped off
mechanic,
the
man.
edge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would have
It
had
is
so
a
much more fun if
stinker,
you had to
though.
Wraith walk to the back of the room and then get yoinked into the melee.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's so fun, man.
So Dorky's making a strong argument to move Fireack out of S. I mean, wait, Dratnos, are we dumb? Like, we're saying that 80% of this fight is okay to bad,
Yeah.
and then we're putting it in S tier. That makes no sense.
Well, I think the point that Dorky's making is probably kind of well taken here as well, that like, if you think about people reaching this boss later, the percentage of their prog time that's going to be in P3 is going
way
to be
lower.
So much less than I spent in P3, and I spent like half as much time in P3 as you guys spent in P3.
Wow, what a flex, Dratnos.
They're going to spend like half as much time or less in P3 than I spent in P3, right? Like, so they're going to be just only getting a couple pulls in that phase, and the part of the fight that's going to be equally long, if not longer, is going to be the first intermission and the second phase.
Yeah,
of, like,
imagine that. Imagine
Yeah.
90%, 80 to 90% of your progression. No, it's probably 80.
Yeah.
Say 80% of your progression on Fireack is P1 intermission, and P2. There's just zero.
Yep.
We can future proof this and make this not S, I think.
Yeah. All right.
I also think
Is it
a lot
before?
of people going into.
Sorry, go ahead, Dorky.
I was gonna say, like, I think a lot of people who are going to be progging this fight, they're just going to be spending like a night or two, if not 3 nights, figuring out how to do intermission and figuring out how to get weak auras working. And it's so fucking frustrating. Like, it's not just my guild too, because I think a lot of guilds had this problem. I was reading on Twitter too. Like, I remember now was like, oh yeah, what like a dumb intermission where we just spend an entire night diagnosing a weak aura, because like you have to get the weak aura working for you to be able to do this mission. Like we tried using Northern Skies weak aura, and then we tried using the liquid pack, and it was just like there was something going wrong with it, and we couldn't figure it out.
Oh yeah, I agree. I agree with you that the weak auras and that intermission is like egregiously bad.
I never thought about how our weak aura could be really bad for groups that have anyone that won't take accountability. Because I don't know if Bart ever fixed this, but we had a failure in ours where, and I don't know if we ever figured this out, but if 11 red people, if 10 red people press and then 1 purple pressed it on accident, then it bricks the whole fucking weak aura. And if only 9 people press it, it bricks the whole fucking weak aura. It requires all 10 red people to press it, and there's no like, the weak aura has no way to know if you do it otherwise. So like, you just wipe, and what can happen is like we can do it, and then like what usually happened for us is someone would take the gate too late, and then they would like get frazzled and just like press it on accident or forget. But then like people would just be like, oh, I fucked up. But like if you're in a guild where someone doesn't know they fucked up or won't say they fucked up, then you're going to be sitting there diagnosing why the weak aura didn't work, and it's because someone didn't press the thing or did on accident.
Well, or also they might not know if they pressed it or not. Like, oh, like, oh, wait, did I press it?
Well,
or
it
not?
tells you in chat.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Well, you have to add that in, yeah.
Yeah, that was Dranos' suggestion, I think.
We added into all of our macros /raid. I pressed my macro so that we could go back.
That's
and
so
diagnose
cringe,
this.
though. What we're saying right now,
exactly what
we're saying right now is so cringe. Hey, we wiped in the intermission because one of our players didn't, or one of our players did press the macro when they shouldn't have, and therefore we were unable. We were unable to do the intermission because of that. That is fucking horrible. Like that's actually horrible.
Yeah. It's a very, very bad phase. Like the worst. It's probably the single worst phase they've made this expansion, maybe ever. And yet, I don't know. I still love the fight. It's so weird. But yeah, that was awful. It is awful. It sucks.
Yeah, I love the fight too.
The best time to change that would have been before they released it. It would still be good if they changed it.
So it has to go.
If they changed it next reset, it would be so good.
So it has to be an A and not S. It also has to be below Sark, right? Like Sark was just like infinitely less problematic and had more good phases. But like none of them lived up to Fire P3. But like as time goes on, if we want to future-proof this, the less time that people spend in P3 Fire the more of the fight they're doing that's just bad and annoying. And Sarkreth wasn't really like that.
Yeah, I think for a lot of guilds, it'll boil down to like, I just learn P1 and P2, and then by the time you get to P3, you're like getting to the point where you pretty much just kill at any bow, which is actually kind of similar to Tindril, where like you kind of just like you learn P1, P2, and you kind of just kill in P3.
Yeah, Tindril also has this part at the end of the fight where you are flying through, you know, anti-air defense flak guns shooting you out of the sky.
Oh yeah, I did that. That was cool.
And that is also something that is gone from the fight if you do enough damage. So like Firac, you lose the very hard overlap at the very end of the fight that Race to World First guilds wipe to a bunch, which I think is good. I think it's good that I think on Tindril especially, it's good that you don't have to do that. I do think on Firac it would be better if they could have found a way to keep that part and you just have the other parts of the fight be the ones that get easier. But I don't know if there's a way to do that with how the fight works. So I don't know. I do think the first intermission is the worst phase they've ever made, maybe. But I do think P3 is still the best phase they've ever made, probably. So
it does feel fulfilling.
I think it does kind of offset. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't blame you if you hate it more than you love it, though.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't hate it as much now that like I'm at the end of the fight. Just like early progging this fight, it's like, oh, it's such a fucking slog. I'm just waiting there and like I don't even know what's going on. I'm literally just like sitting there and just waiting until people figure out like what's going on with the weak auras and stuff.
Bro. I'm trying to find our Shadowlands raid boss tier list to kind of look at the difference side by side. And I'm the cold open to this video, which I forgot until right now, is saying the door opens like Fate Scribe says it. Do you know what that sounds like? Exactly like that. Door opens. What a beautiful cold open. Wait, I need to see what the final list looks like side by side. Wait, we had way more S tier bosses in Shadowlands actually. Let me
Yeah, Shadowlands had some bangers.
Shadowlands did have some bangers.
It had lower lows, I think. I actually don't know if it had higher highs either, but it had more highs.
Well, I'm crazy for not putting the boss names on there, but it looks like in S tier last expansion we had we also had more bosses. That's worth mentioning. right? We had 3 raids, but all the raids had more bosses than this expansion's raids.
Yep.
Okay, so it's Halandris, Rygalon, Sire Denathrius, Sludgefist, Painsmith, Anduin, and what the fuck is the last one? Oh, that's the actual raid. I think we ranked the raids as well. So it's we have 6 S tier bosses last expansion, and we have 8 A tier bosses. Damn. Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah, we put Sylvanas in A tier.
Ooh, is that right?
What the hell?
Is that accurate?
I think if I
no
remember our conversation on Sylvanas, the take was
P3 really good. I guess it's kind of similar to Fire Act.
Yeah, exactly. Very similar to Fire Act. P1 was also really good. Like, before you started stopping DPS a little bit, like, into gear, well, maybe a lot of other guilds in their first progression stopped DPS in Sylvanas. P2, unassailably bad. Super long, not good. Bad phase. P1 was good. Like, it was a little bit Moonkin-centric. Like, doing P1 didn't feel bad. It felt good. And then P3 was, like, one of the best phases ever. So I think we gave Sylvanas a lot of credit. I think in hindsight, I'd probably maybe drop it down a little bit. Like, was Sylvanas as good as Sarkareth? No. Like, just definitely not. And so,
yeah, I think what we might have here is like we might be shifting.
It's all
down
relative. It's all
tiers,
relative.
right?
It's relative to the bosses in the list, and sometimes you're a little high on it. Like, typically, you and I are always like really higher on bosses going into raids than sometimes they are in reality. Sometimes we're wrong the other way too, but it's because we care so much about the construction of the fights and why they're being made and like what they're trying to accomplish, and sometimes that doesn't live up to it, but even sometimes it does live up to it, but it's just not as fun to do over and over again. And that's, you can't predict that. That's not what we're trying to predict either, right? It's like, that's how that can be different. But this is like, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm okay with that, but it looks like, yeah, Sylvanas is a little high. What else did we have in A tier last expansion? Looks like Zymox.
No swamp tier.
On the last one? I don't know. I just forgot to make it, I guess.
Shadowlands.
If we had done like added some extra tiers to this, we would have had to add like 30 tiers so that we could put Stone Legion Generals down to the bottom one.
Oh yeah, we only had Stone Legion in D.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably just didn't make extra tiers this time.
Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Stone Legion Generals is probably the worst fight ever.
Because I do think you would have to get down to like the Z tier or something before you got a home
Yeah, it
that
was
was appropriate
bad.
for that.
Dude, that
thing.
expansion had, I can't believe the same expansion had Stone Legion and fucking Kel'Thuzad. But dude, they were back to back. Back to back second to last
Yeah.
bosses were that. Oh my god, dude. That's crazy to think about. Then they kind of nailed it with Rygalon.
It was such a stretch too. Holy fuck, SLG was so fucking long.
Did we ever do one of these for BFA?
I don't think so.
It's been a long time. Maybe that's maybe yeah.
It's a look. It's a long farm. We gotta milk some content.
Yeah, we gotta
in here
milk some
somewhere.
content. This will be yeah, and then we can do the ranking them against each other thing.